Here's why Aegon II betrayed his own blood by seizing the Iron Throne. Imagine a kingdom on the brink of civil war, a dynasty teetering on the edge of destruction, and a prince who chose ambition over blood. This is the story of Aegon II Targaryen, the man who betrayed his own sister, Rhaenyra, to seize the Iron Throne, sparking one of the deadliest conflicts in Westerosi history, the Dance of the Dragons. It's a story of jealousy, fear, and the relentless hunger for power, one that would forever stain the Targaryen legacy. But why did Aegon II turn against his own blood? To understand this, we must look at the intricate web of Targaryen politics, family dynamics, and the heavy burden of tradition that shaped his fateful decisions. Aegon II was born into a world where dragons ruled the skies and the Iron Throne commanded absolute authority. He was the eldest son of King Viserys I and Queen Alicent Hightower, and from birth, he was expected to inherit the mantle of leadership. But his claim was far from uncontested. King Viserys had named his daughter, Rhaenyra, as his heir, setting the stage for an unprecedented challenge to male primogeniture. This decision, radical for the time, meant that Aegon II would not automatically inherit the throne, despite being the eldest son. For a prince raised to expect the crown, this was a bitter pill to swallow, and it planted the seeds of resentment that would grow into outright rebellion. From an early age, Aegon II was groomed for power, trained in the arts of war and courtcraft, and surrounded by advisors and supporters who reinforced the idea that the throne was his birthright. Meanwhile, Rhaenyra, older and appointed heir, represented not just a personal challenge, but a fundamental shift in the political order of Westeros. In the eyes of many, including the conservative factions at court, a female ruler was an unnatural concept, a dangerous break from centuries of tradition. Aegon II's supporters framed his eventual usurpation as a defense of the realm itself, portraying him as the savior of Westeros from the perceived chaos of a female monarchy. But this is only part of the story. Aegon II's betrayal was not solely about politics or tradition, it was deeply personal. The rivalry between him and Rhaenyra was nurtured by their families, their allies, and the very structure of the Targaryen court. Queen Alicent, Aegon's mother, was a key player in this drama. Ambitious and politically astute, she viewed Rhaenyra not only as a threat to her son's future but as a direct challenge to her own influence. The Hightowers were one of the most powerful families in Westeros, and Alicent was determined to ensure that her bloodline would sit upon the Iron Throne. She whispered warnings, nurtured jealousy, and cultivated a court that was fiercely loyal to her son. Aegon II did not act in a vacuum. He was pushed, prodded, and persuaded by a network of advisors and relatives who believed his seizure of the throne was both justified and necessary. Jealousy played a critical role in Aegon II's decisions. Rhaenyra was everything he was not: charismatic, intelligent, and universally respected. Her claim to the throne was backed by her father's decree, and she had already demonstrated an aptitude for leadership. In contrast, Aegon II struggled to assert his own identity and authority. Every recognition of Rhaenyra's legitimacy was a dagger to his ego, and every display of her competence deepened his insecurity. He could see the love and loyalty she inspired among lords and knights, and he feared that his own position in the world would be diminished if he did not act decisively. This combination of envy and ambition proved lethal, and it pushed him toward a path from which there was no return. The environment at court further amplified Aegon II's anxieties. Westerosi politics were notoriously ruthless, and the Targaryen court was no exception. Factions formed around both heirs, and the tension was palpable. Every decision, every conversation, every whisper carried the weight of potential betrayal. Advisors on both sides stoked the flames, portraying the other as a mortal threat. For Aegon II, this constant pressure created a sense of urgency and entitlement. He was told, repeatedly, that the throne was his by right, that the realm would descend into chaos if he did not act, and that his sister's rule would weaken the Targaryen dynasty. In such an environment, treachery was not just an option, it was framed as a duty. But the betrayal itself required more than just ambition and pressure, it required opportunity. That opportunity came with the death of King Viserys I. When the king passed away, the moment of truth arrived. Rhaenyra had been preparing to ascend the throne, but she faced immediate resistance from Aegon II and his supporters. Within days, the halls of power were filled with whispers of rebellion. Lords and knights who had long supported Rhaenyra were suddenly confronted with promises of favor and power should they back the younger prince. Dragons, symbols of Targaryen might, were aligned with both sides, making the conflict not only political but also deadly on a scale never seen before. Aegon II's seizure of the Iron Throne was swift, calculated, and, in many ways, inevitable given the circumstances. Fear was another driving force behind Aegon II's actions. He did not merely covet the throne, he feared losing his place in history, losing the respect of his peers, and, above all, losing control. In a world where rulership was absolute and succession dictated the fate of the realm, the stakes could not have been higher. Aegon too was acutely aware that any hesitation could lead to his marginalization, or worse, his death. By acting decisively and claiming the throne, he eliminated immediate threats to his position, even if it meant betraying his own sister. From his perspective, the act was both defensive and offensive. It secured power while neutralizing a rival. The consequences of this betrayal were catastrophic. The Targaryen civil war that followed, known as the Dance of the Dragons, tore the kingdom apart. Families were divided, cities burned, and dragons clashed in the skies above Westeros. The personal betrayal of Rhaenyra by her own brother became a symbol of the broader destruction wrought by ambition and mistrust. While Aegon II initially gained the throne, his reign was marked by instability, fear, and violence. His choices set the stage for a conflict that claimed countless lives, including many members of his own family, and left the realm in a state of devastation from which it would take decades to recover. It's important to understand that Aegon II was not merely a villain in this story. He was a product of his time, shaped by expectations, upbringing, and the pressures of courtly life. In a society where male primogeniture was considered sacred, and where power was the ultimate measure of a person's worth, his actions can be seen as a combination of ambition, fear, and cultural conditioning. The Targaryens themselves were no strangers to internal conflict, and Aegon II's betrayal was, in many ways, a continuation of patterns established by his ancestors. Yet, this does not excuse the personal nature of his treachery, which struck at the heart of family bonds and honor. Moreover, the influence of those around him cannot be overstated. Queen Alicent Hightower, Sir Criston Cole, and other key figures played critical roles in shaping his decisions. They provided counsel, support, and, at times, pressure that steered him toward usurpation. Historians of Westeros often debate whether Aegon II would have acted without their encouragement, but the fact remains that their presence amplified his insecurities and sharpened his ambition. Betrayal, in this sense, was not solely his doing. It was the result of a confluence of personal ambition, maternal influence, and political circumstance. Another factor to consider is the deeply ingrained sense of entitlement that pervaded Aegon II's upbringing. From a young age, he was told he was destined for greatness, trained to wield power, and surrounded by those who reinforced the notion that the throne was his by birthright. When faced with a challenge to that expectation, Rhaenyra's appointment as heir, he could not simply accept it. In his mind, seizing the Iron Throne was not betrayal, it was reclamation of what was rightfully his. This mindset, combined with jealousy and fear, created a perfect storm that led to one of the most infamous acts of treachery in Westerosi history. Yet, it wasn't only personal ambition that drove him, strategic calculation played a role as well. Aegon II understood that claiming the throne first would give him a significant advantage over Rhaenyra. In a world where legitimacy could be contested,